My name is Terry. The paper plates were still warm with barbecue grease when my dad, Henry, raised his glass and called me a disgrace in front of 30 people. I was standing at the edge of our family's Father's Day table. He lifted his beer like a toast and said he was proud of all his children. Then his eyes landed on me, and he sneered, "Except the disgrace sitting at this table." No one at the table said a word. They just kept eating, as if my father's words were nothing more than background noise. I didn't argue. Instead, I smiled, placed a plain manila envelope beside his plate, wished him a happy Father's Day, and walked towards my car. As I reached the end of the gravel drive, the engine idling while I waited for a tractor to pass, the screen door banged, and my father's enraged screams filled the air. Neighbors peeked out from their porches, their curiosity piqued by the commotion. To understand what was in that envelope, you have to go back 6 years to the day my mother, Rose, passed away. Our family has been in the farming business for 4 generations. The Thompson farm, a 100-acre spread, has been in our blood. My dad is a proud and stubborn man. He believes in doing things his way and has always looked down on my career as a financial analyst. My older brother, Jake, is 36, 4 years older than me. He's always been the apple of my father's eye, the one who stayed on the farm and worked the land. That morning, before the fateful party, I was sitting in my office in Brookfield, surrounded by a client's stack of receipts and a cold cup of coffee. It was technically a holiday, but I'm used to working odd hours, especially when a farming family is on the verge of financial ruin. I'd just helped a client, Mr. Miller, avoid a hefty fine by finding a loophole in the tax laws. Saving people from financial disasters is what I do, but my family only sees me as the cold-hearted daughter who chose numbers over family. I looked at the calendar and saw that it was Father's Day. I'd circled it weeks ago but then tried to forget. It was a 30-minute drive to the farm and 30 minutes back. Every year, I told myself I wouldn't go, but I always did. I did it for my mother, who would have wanted me there, and because I had unfinished business with the farm. As I drove to the farm, the scenery was familiar. A 2-lane road, then a dirt path, and finally, the old wooden fence my great-grandfather had built. The farm looked like a picture-perfect postcard, with flags flying and cars parked in the field. But I knew there was more to it than met the eye. When I arrived, Jake was greeting the guests at the gate, acting like he owned the place. His wife, Lily, was refilling drinks and making snide comments under her breath. My Aunt Martha sat in the shade, judging everyone with her cold eyes. My dad gave me a barely perceptible nod as I approached the table. I carried a plate of food and stood there, feeling like an outsider in my own family. Jake leaned over and whispered something in my father's ear. My father nodded slowly, his expression serious. Whatever Jake was selling, my father was buying. I just didn't know what it was yet. 6 years ago, my mother was dying in the master bedroom, and the farm was in deep trouble. The mortgage was 4 payments behind, and the equipment loans were piling up. Jake came up with a sure-thing investment. He said a friend of his had a cattle breeding deal that would clear the debt by the end of the year. All my father had to do was take out a second mortgage on the farm. I had questions. I asked who the friend was, where the contracts were, and what would happen to the farm if the deal went south. Jake called me heartless, saying that our mother was dying, and all I cared about were the numbers. I'd spent 3 nights preparing a detailed financial projection. I showed it to my father, but he just looked at it for a second and then tossed it aside. "We don't need your spreadsheets, Terry. We need faith," he said. 2 years ago, I drove to the farm to check on my father because he hadn't answered my calls. When I got there, I noticed a stack of mail hidden under the newspaper. The top envelope had the bank's logo and a red second notice across the front. I knew what it meant. I offered to help, but my father brushed me off, saying that he and Jake had everything under control. I knew he was lying, but I didn't push. Back at the party, I felt a sense of loneliness. A young cousin asked me who I was, and when I told him I was his aunt, he just shrugged. I looked for my mother, as I always did, but she was gone. I touched my purse and felt the hard edge of the tin box inside. I'd carried it around for 2 years, and today, I knew it was time to use it. Around 4 p.m. The neighbors, the Johnsons, came over. Mr. Johnson complimented my father on how well the farm looked. My father puffed up his chest and put his arm around Jake. This land has been in our family for 4 generations, and it's going to stay that way, he declared. Jake nodded humbly, and Lily beamed with pride. But I knew the truth. The farm was on the verge of being sold. Jake was working the party like a politician. He was showing the Johnsons around the farm, talking about all the improvements they were going to make. I overheard him telling a cousin that the transfer of the farm was almost done, just a few signatures away. Something about his words didn't sit right with me. I've spent my career analyzing financial situations, and I knew that something was off. I'd learned from my farm clients how a place can look prosperous on paper but be on the brink of collapse. I'd seen how banks foreclose on farms and how families lose everything. I'd also learned about the legal loopholes and ways to save a property from being sold. After seeing the second notice 2 years ago, I went to see Mr. Harris, a real estate lawyer in town. He'd known my family for years. When I asked him about the possibility of a third party buying the bank's debt, he was initially surprised. But then he explained that it was legal and quiet, as long as the bank was willing to sell. I made a difficult decision. I'd spent 10 years building my career and had a small savings account and a retirement fund. I borrowed against my office and drained my savings to buy the farm's debt. Mr. Harris set up a trust in my name, and the bank got its money. My father continued to live on the farm, none the wiser. Back at the party, I sat under the old oak tree that my mother had planted. I took out the tin box and opened it. Inside was a letter from my mother. Her handwriting was shaky, but her words were clear. Terry, your father is going to lose this farm. His pride won't let him accept help from you, but you're the only one who can save it. Do it quietly and let him keep his pride. He may never thank you, but do it anyway. I read the letter twice, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of purpose. I knew that I couldn't let Jake sell the farm out from under us. As I was sitting there, I saw Jake pull my father aside near the barn. Jake had a folder in his hand and was holding out a pen. Just sign here, Dad, and everything will be taken care of, he said. My father squinted at the papers, looking confused. Before my father could sign, I called out, Dad, wait. Jake quickly closed the folder and said it was family business and none of my concern. My father's jaw tightened, and he said they'd finish inside. Later, I overheard Lily talking to Aunt Martha. Once it's all signed over, Jake says we'll finally get what we're owed, she said. That's when I knew for sure that Jake was trying to sell the farm. I waited for my chance. When the cake was being cut, I slipped into the house. The folder was on the kitchen table. I opened it and saw a listing agreement for the farm. The asking price was low, and the seller's signature line was filled with Jake's name by power of attorney. I took out my phone and photographed every page. I knew that I had to expose the truth. I called Mr. Harris and told him what I'd found. He said that if Jake had a valid power of attorney and found a buyer, the farm could be sold in 60 days. But he also reminded me that the farm couldn't be sold without going through the trust I'd set up. I had a choice. I could let Jake's scheme fail on its own, quietly, and continue to be the silent savior of the farm. Or I could expose the truth and face the consequences. I thought about my mother's letter and decided that it was time for the truth to come out. I printed 3 documents, the recorded deed of the trust, the payoff letter from the bank, and a copy of the listing agreement. I put them in a plain manila envelope and wrote Happy Father's Day on the front. I almost didn't go back to the party. I sat at my kitchen table, thinking about the impact of what I was about to do. But then I read my mother's letter one more time and knew that I had to do it. When I returned to the farm, it was almost dusk. The party was winding down, and the family was gathered around the table. My father was holding court, telling stories about the old days. Jake saw me first, and his face paled. My father lifted his glass and started to talk about how proud he was of his children. Then he looked at me and said, "Accept the disgrace sitting at this table." I stepped forward, placed the envelope beside his plate, and said, "Happy Father's Day, Dad. Open it when you're ready." I then turned and walked away. As I walked to my car, I heard the sound of the envelope being opened. My father let out a gasp, and then the whole party fell silent. I heard him shout, "Jake, what is this?" I started the engine and drove away. I didn't stay to watch the chaos unfold. I knew that the truth was finally out, and it was up to my family to deal with it. In the days that followed, the listing for the farm was taken down. Jake had a hard time explaining himself. His creditors came after him, and Lily took the kids and left. My father called me 9 days later. He didn't apologize, but he asked me why I'd never told him. I told him that he wouldn't have let me help if he'd known it was me. He then asked if I'd come to the farm again. I told him that I'd keep the roof over his head for my mother and the land, but I wouldn't tolerate being called a disgrace. He didn't argue. I've learned that being the strong one doesn't mean keeping silent forever. Sometimes, the kindest and the strongest thing to do is to let the truth sit down at the table. And that's the story of how I finally got the last word in my family.